So yeah, thank you very much for coming along. As it said, I am actually, and still, and I've managed to maintain this #1 search result on Google for swearing nudity, which is, well, actually my life's greatest achievement to date. So, yeah, thank you very much for coming along. The talk's called Swearing Nudity and Other Vulnerable Positions. This is a talk about vulnerability and why those things are important in teams. I'm going to apologize to begin with. There's a relatively low chance of actual nudity here this evening. I apologize. So, I mean, although I'd say, you know, you're welcome to leave, but the weather is really shit outside, so you're probably better off just hanging in here. We are going to do some improvisation a little bit later. Now, when we're doing those exercises, now that I've seeded you with words like swearing and nudity specifically, just do, you know, if you really kind of let yourselves go during those exercises, just be considerate of the people in your direct vicinity. I think that would be good to hold on to. So, yeah, my name's John LeDroux. I've been in software engineering for about 2 decades now, and I've done a lot of different jobs in that time. Most of my time I spend now working with software teams who are often transitioning to, I think people are probably aware of agile and other words that I don't like that much, really. But that's what a lot of the teams are trying to do, trying to improve the way they work, improve the way they collaborate. Back in October 2016, I, for some reason or another, decided that I wanted to start a podcast. There's quite a lot of podcasts in the kind of this agile space, and most of them involve a bunch of very interesting, smart people having a Skype call together. They record the Skype call and they upload it. And while I had no problem with that, in fact, a lot of my friends had been involved in it, I'd been involved in those podcasts, I just wanted to do something that was creatively different from what was already out there. I didn't really know what I wanted to talk about. I just knew I wanted to do this thing. I thought it would be fun. So, because I didn't know what I wanted to talk about, I went to this conference back in October 2016. Funny enough, I was only in Edinburgh just recently. I basically just turned up at this conference with a microphone and wandered around and spoke to people who were in this space, you know, people I'd worked with, and just said, what matters to you? What is the most important thing for you as a coach, as someone that works with teams day in, day out? What's the main thing that you find yourselves doing? And this conversation kept coming up. People would just say, they'd be talking about a team, say, I mean, you could just see the team wasn't safe. And I was like, as someone that's worked with teams, I kind of knew what they meant almost instinctively, I guess. But I wasn't sure if I understood that we understood the same thing. What was that shared definition? And I just say, so what do you actually mean by that? And he go, oh, you know, it's the way that they look at each other, the way they walk in the room, the way they hold themselves. I was like, okay, but what does that really mean? And actually, it was really hard to get to a point. I mean, I was only there for that day, but in that day of what actually that meant, what did this thing that we call safety, that we all kind of understood as coaches, but what does that actually mean? It was kind of like safety was the thing that seemed to be so essential, so critical. It's essential, but totally enigmatic. It was like dark matter or dark energy. It's supposedly holding the entire universe together, but no one knows what the hell it is. So it seemed, yeah, but what is it? What was this safety thing? So I left Edinburgh, and I definitely knew that this safety thing was the topic I really wanted to dig into. What I also left with, as it happened, was a heavily inflamed wrist caused by what was previously undiagnosed gout in my wrist. Now, I don't know if anyone here, it looks like a pretty young crowd, which I would say that most of you, thankfully, have not experienced gout. And it was quite surprising to me and my doctor to have experienced gout because other than my obvious appearances, I'm not actually a middle-aged alcoholic from the 17th century. And So I basically had, by the end of the day, my wrist was swollen out to about here. It was bright red, and blowing on it would cause it to feel like my arm was being ripped off from somewhere around here. It's not a very pleasant experience. So I had an additional complication, which was that I'm stood at the electronic barriers to get on my train to go back home. And my ticket is right here, okay, just there. And this hand ain't going in that pocket. That's not happening. This hand cannot reach that ticket. There is a very angry Scotsman who also would like to get on this train behind me, and one or two people behind him. And I can tell you that when that's the only thing you can do, kind of look around and ask for assistance. Yeah, neither me nor him felt particularly safe at that moment. But thankfully, I got on the train. And thankfully, the gout subsided. So, yes. So I recovered. So what I ended up doing was when I got back home, I literally just reached out to everyone I knew in the community. Now, one thing about the Agile community that you don't do, or what you do realize quite quickly, is that the Agile community is an immensely generous community. I didn't realize this then. I thought when I emailed 40-odd people, most of which had previously just lived on my bookshelf, that I would maybe get 2, maybe 3 responses if I was lucky. Basically, everyone said yes. And I ended up with a huge body of audio. This is actually out of date now. I think there's probably been at least 5 additional interviews, and there's probably another 10 hours of audio at least on that as research. So I, as well as doing this research and kind of just collecting kind of audio recordings and discussions, I also did my own research, and this led me to a thing called Google's Project Aristotle. Has anyone here heard of Google's Project Aristotle before they came? 1 or 2? Yeah. So, yeah, Google, they're quite a big company. One or two people might have heard of them. They have a large number of teams, not just software teams, but a huge number of people. Thousands of people work at Google internationally. And they had this question, which seems like an obvious question. You have one team, and Team A is doing really well. They're fantastic. They're achieving. They're delivering upon all of their expectations. And you have Team B that, for some reason, isn't. Okay. Well, why is that? Why do you have one team delivering fantastically well and another team, yeah? And is it not just the obvious? Surely it's just that Team A has amazing people and Team B, yeah, maybe not so much. And that is an interesting question. Sorry, there we go. I didn't come up. There we go. There it is. That's an interesting question, because what they found out in their research and what they were really challenging, and this is what comes from the name of the project, is that maybe, in fact, what they found was it was the way that teams worked together and the way that team members were collaborating that was a much, much, much more critical indicator to the potential success of a team. Way more so. Sorry, me, I'm just moving that because I feel like I'm very loud suddenly. That's way more important than actually even the individual competencies of the people on the team. You would have teams, and some of the teams that they had there were actually significantly more senior from an experience perspective, talking about software teams in this case, but they were actually performing less effectively than significantly junior teams that collaborated more effectively. So let's look at what these were, what makes a great team. So what they found was that when they interviewed individuals on teams at Google as part of this study, they ended up with 5 key indicators that the individuals on the team would report back on, that would say that they had on that team. So in reverse order, at number 5, we have a thing called impact. This means that when you're on a team, you feel that the work you're doing actually affects change in the organization, that it actually matters. I find that kind of, again, this seems really obvious, doesn't it? Of course, if the work you're doing doesn't affect change in the organization, then clearly you're not an effective team. What's interesting is that the vast majority of teams that I have worked with wouldn't be able to directly account for the change that they made that day to the code base, or the thing that they actually contributed to that day, how that has benefited the organization overall. There's often a significant disconnect. One of the things is that feeling of impact. So knowing as an engineer that you get to the end of the day and you think, what have I done today? Have I actually benefited anything? Have I just committed some code just for the fun of it? Or have I actually delivered some value? So what I find interesting with this is there's a thing at Facebook, actually. And Facebook have this called Developer Bootcamp program. And how this works, I think it's 6 or 8 weeks. I can never quite remember. It might have changed now since I last looked into it. And when you join as an engineer, you literally are there on their boot camp for a fixed period of time, regardless of the level. So that boot camp is a training thing. You're given various jobs to do. But one of the key things is that often on your first day, in fact, the vast majority of people that join on their very first day in the organization are going to commit code live to facebook.com. Now, people go, oh yeah, but it's obvious what that's going to be. It'll just be like a little CSS change or something like that. It's not going to be a high-risk thing. It's sure, absolutely right. It's blatantly not going to be reworking the Facebook timeline algorithm or something like that on your first day. But what's interesting about it being a CSS change is that CSS is inherently visual. That's kind of what it does. If you make a style change to a website, it's a visual change. And if on your first day, the end of your very first day working at Facebook, you have corrected a typo or changed something, a tiny little fix, that you can see live on Facebook, well, what are you going to do? You're going to ring your mum at the end of the first day. Oh my God, mum, look, just click through. Yeah, click on there, click on there, click on there, click on there, go in there. It's somewhere 19 levels deep in the privacy settings on page 5 where they've hidden that thing, where whatever it might be. That button was a slightly different shade of green 5 minutes ago. And you feel the impact right away. The other side, there was another study done by a lady called Teresa Armablay. She wrote a brilliant book called The Progress Principle. And what she was doing was looking at 5,000 knowledge workers across the States. So by knowledge workers, what that means is pretty much anyone. So it could be teams working in software engineering. There are also people working as scientific researchers, civil engineers, a whole group of people, essentially groups of smart people collaborating on difficult problems. And they made daily diaries, so these kind of fixed questions. Every single day for 6 months, they all reported back in and said, this is the feedback that I have, this is what I achieved today, this is the support I might have had from a manager, etc. And what they found is that the single most important factor to how engaged and motivated an individual on those teams felt was making regular progress on meaningful work. The people that knew at the end of the day that they had taken a small step towards an understood shared goal and that they had achieved that were the people that were hands down more motivated than anything else. Which is really interesting, because what's amazing is that in leadership, and one of the other things they found in that study was that the vast amount of leaders didn't actually attribute facilitating progress as a core goal to what they were trying to do as leading their teams. They were seeing other things, managing goals, setting deadlines, etc., but not just helping the teams get their work done was not seen as a core thing. So there's another aspect to that. Meaningful work. Meaning is number 4. So what's interesting here? So what do we mean by meaning? What does this meaning thing mean? So back in 1983, Steve Jobs called up John Scully and said, do you want to sell sugared water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come and help me change the world? Now, based on what happened and Steve ending up being kicked out of Apple and other things that happened in that, probably not the best decision that Steve had made. But what's interesting there is what he was doing to entice him. He was tapping into this deep-seated human desire that we have to do stuff that matters, to do stuff that actually affects change in the world. So at this point, people go, all right, well, how the hell did Google do okay with this? How did they have teams with this? I mean, they're an advertising agency for all intents and purposes. How the hell do I work? I mean, I work for an insurance company, or even worse, the government. There's no meaning here. How can I find that? And you're right, it's way easier to find meaning in your work if you happen to work for an organization that is alleviating the world of poverty or curing cancer. Clearly, that's going to be easier. But interestingly, I have worked with both a company that has been trying to cure cancer and alleviate the world of poverty, and neither of those organizations had high levels of engagement, mainly because that strategy that's set all the way up here still has to be effectively communicated down to the people that are delivering against those goals down here, and they're frequently not. So how do you get meaning then? If we're not lucky enough to work for a company that is curing cancer, then how do we find that? So one of the things I found is that meaning is actually a personal thing, and it tends to fall into two areas. There is one thing is that human beings find meaning in their work when they can support and connect to another human being while doing that work. When you have that human connection, you find meaning in the work. And the other thing is that we want to do and feel that we can do the best work that we can do. We want to know at the end of the day that we haven't just hit, 70% of how good we are, that we're actually delivering stuff that we can be proud of. So there was a study in '99 done by a chap called Alistair Cockburn, and this was looking into the effectiveness of pair programming, that is. What's interesting is that, so some of this was quite well known. They found that a pair working on an equivalent problem were actually 13% slower because of what they call communication overhead than an individual working on the same task. But that same pair produced anywhere between 25 and 30% less defects in delivering that task compared to someone working on their own. So you know that there's a net positive there overall. So what they also found out, which I find more interesting, is that 96% of the people pairing said that they just enjoyed their day more pairing than when they were working on their own. And 95% said that they had greater confidence in the quality of the work they were delivering, that the quality of the solution they made was good. Which meant that added meaning on both of those facets. You're supporting the pair that you're working with, and you have greater confidence in the work that you've delivered, greater ability to have pride in what you have done. So then we get to a thing called structure and clarity, which is that team members that actually have, the goals communicated effectively to them are much better at knowing what to do against those goals. The most important thing here is that you actually have to have consistency and understanding, and it's that strategic alignment. And I mentioned before that I'd worked with teams that, were trying to alleviate the world of poverty as an organizational goal. But if alleviate world of poverty is the strategy up here, then that needs to pass all the way down and has a clearly understood line of understanding between those teams. If that's your organizational goal, then your teams cannot feel like they are not walking towards that goal when they're aligning it. They need to know where the work that they're doing and how that is contributing to that goal. You will not have structure and clarity unless you have that connected thinking. And I've seen in many, many big organizations that strategic alignment is sorely missing. What I do use actually is an exercise what I've done with a number of teams on to measure how aligned they might be. This is often done at a project level. It's kind of hard to do if you're trying to get them to. Funnily enough, many teams will know what the big organizational goals are. That's normally understood. They just know full well that they're not acting or moving towards them in many situations. But at a team level and a project level, can be more interesting. So what I do is an exercise where I give everyone a Post-it note. So whatever, let's say you've got 7, 8 people on a team. And I say, go and hide away in the corner of the room, and I just want you to write 3 words down, the 3 words which to you are the kind of bullet point goals for this project or this product that you're working on. I've only had real alignment once. A team, 8 people, they went away, they came back and they handed me a stack of Post-it notes. You kind of shuffle them up, and you stick them up on the wall, and I had 8 question marks. So, yeah, it was kind of sad and interesting at the same time. Dependability. So, unsurprisingly, the teams that get shit done are more effective. This kind of comes from something else. So the interesting thing here is that, yeah, on the hand of it, you have what's called external dependability. So a team is externally dependable to its customers or whatever those equivalents are. And clearly teams that deliver are teams that are more effective. What is the interesting thing is that we also have a thing called internal interdependability between team members. So what does that mean? Well, I'm guessing some of you or people raise your hand if you currently do like a stand-up each day at work as on your team. So you have a little stand-up meeting. So in your stand-up meeting, you get up and you stood in a little circle, and then each person said, okay, yesterday I was doing this thing, and blah, 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 and then I was doing that, and then I was doing that, and I was doing that. And at some point it comes around to you, and then you do the little thing where you say, okay, so today I think I'm going to do the something or another thing, and I think I'm going to get it done by the end of the day. So you've made a little oral commitment to your team that that's what you're going to focus on, and you think you're going to get that. And then it gets to the end of the day, and that hasn't worked for some reason. You've not been able to deliver that. So what's interesting here is that the internal interdependability is essentially just that when you say you will get something done, the team believes that you will do that, and the team has that kind of trust. But people go, but in reality, sometimes stuff just goes wrong. This is tech. It's not that that person didn't believe they would get it done by the end of the day. Surely all of this just comes crumbling down the moment one person struggles and gets stuck. Well, kind of. There's an important other aspect to this, which is that let's say you do start work on that thing and it gets to after lunch and you get back to your desk and you think, actually, crap, there's no way I'm going to get this done by the end of the day. Well, what you do and what that commitment is not getting it done at all costs. It's raising your hand in the air and saying, I'm stuck, I need help, I don't think I'm going to get it done. And the team coming around and saying, okay, let's see what we can do. Let's work together on this. And that brings us to psychological safety. So we'll go into more on what that is specifically. But what's interesting about where this is that psychological safety was the number one indicator, okay? But it wasn't just the most important one. It was actually underpinning all of the other four. So in their research, what they found was that while you might have a team that was essentially effective, but let's say lacking on impact or lacking on one particular facet, it's possible if the team lacked psychological safety, they were not effective. They were significantly impaired and often didn't have high marks in any of the other indicators. So why does this safety matter? Well, at the end of the day, we really care about the way other people perceive us, okay? We inherently care about how actions and things that we might decide to do might potentially negatively affect how other people perceive us. And that tends to break down into these three areas, certainly in a professional setting. So, competence. Do you always feel that you can ask for help without being judged on your competence, without people thinking that maybe you can't do that? Can you raise your hand and say, I actually need some help here? Maybe. Awareness. Do you always feel that you can ask what the goal is without someone else thinking maybe you're the only one that's kind of out of the loop or the only one that doesn't get it? And positivity. Can you raise the red flag when there's a problem, when it looks like this project might potentially be bullshit and we maybe need to stop, without being judged as being the moaning, negative person on the team? That last one I find very interesting. I'm going to describe someone that you may have worked with. You may be currently working with this person, and I'd like you to raise your hand if you recognize this description. I call this person the energy black hole. Has anyone worked with an energy black hole at all? Occasionally, at least once when I did this, there was someone near the front who kind of raised both hands and stuck a leg in the air. Leave your hands in the air for a little bit longer. this person, this energy black hole, have they worked in your organization, let's just say, for longer than other people? Are there any nods there? Yeah. So this is an interesting exercise. What I'd like you to do is imagine this energy black hole, and I'd like you to go right back to their first day. I'm imagining, you know, there's probably like a stone table and everyone's wearing togas or something. It's a long time ago for most organizations. And this is their first day. Now, I'm going to bet that they didn't come into that first meeting on the first day, you know, to meet the team, kind of like, sit down. Shit. God, is the aircon broken? God, it's hot in here. God, who are you? God, oh, you're my boss. Okay, all right. You know what? I don't think they were like that. I don't think they were negative, and I don't think they were a black hole. And if they were, and that's either because you weren't there when they were there and you just can't possibly imagine any aspect of their character being different right now. If they were, then your organization may well have some hiring practice challenges. We have trial periods for a reason. But assuming they weren't like that, and they didn't bring that to the organization, then what did the organization do to them? You know, I think it's an important aspect to consider. So, psychological safety was first looked at in a team setting. It had been defined previously, but only really as an individual idea, by a lady called Amy Edmondson. And she defined it as psychological safety is a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. Now, when I first read this definition, I really struggled with these two words, punished or humiliated, because while I was aware that there are definitely very abusive workplaces out there, thankfully, those abusive workplaces are relatively in the minority. There are plenty of chronically abusive workplaces that are just not very nice places to be, but ones that you could actually describe as truly abusive, that could be full of what we might call punishment or humiliating behavior from leaders or whatever, are relatively few, thankfully. So I was like, but I'm interested in something that affects all organizations, that this is a constant, not just the, you know, the worst of the worst that frankly have bigger problems to deal with than I would be looking to help them with. So what I find here, what I realized actually was this is a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated. Well, belief is a personal thing. Belief is not something that I can observe in someone else. I can't stand a fly on the wall, as you say, and look at that and go, well, that person has clearly been punished in that situation. Because it's not about observing, it's about how it feels. And think about it, if you're in a team and that team has failed to deliver something, failed to deliver a project, missed a deadline, something that happens all the time has happened. But for some reason, your manager decides that it is unfortunately your fault. Okay, you were on that team and it's your fault. Well, then you end up with, then you find out that that pay rise or that bonus or that promotion just kind of went away. You're going to feel kind of punished in that circumstance. And if you're on a team where you have asked for help, they've all said they want to use, you're in a team meeting and all the devs want to use the latest NoSQL database that came out in the last 35 seconds, and you're thinking, oh God, I haven't been following Twitter, I must have missed that post 20 seconds ago when it got to 0.001 alpha, and now they want me to deploy it, whatever, and you raise up your hand and say, hey, I don't know anything about foobar SQL. And they go, really, what? Who the hell? I mean, seriously, you've not heard of it? I mean, it's been out for like 15 seconds. I mean, it just apparently went stable. We totally should have this in production already. And the funny thing is that, you know what, if you're literally told to RTFM at that moment in front of everyone, and I've seen this happen more than once, it can be pretty humiliating. So it turns out that this is a personal experience. This is nothing to do with an observed experience. It's about how it feels. So, segue. One of the people I spoke to was a chap called Phelan McDermott. He's an award-winning theatre director. He's won an Olivier Award. He's been in theatre for over 20 years. He's currently works with the English National Opera. One of the core things for him is that he has used improvisation as a core part of both his actual performances, but also actually just his creative process when he's working with groups to put on a performance. Improvisation is the way they build these performances. And he spoke to me about improv, specifically this concept called yes and. So who in this room knows what improvisational theatre is? And have heard of it. Has anyone done any improvisational theatre before at some point? So this idea called yes and, what he's described it as is the yes and muscle. So what does this mean? Well, in improvisational theatre, as opposed to jazz or any other music, I was actually with some improv jazz musicians recently, is that what you tend to have is some performers, and someone's going to make what's called an offer to the rest of the group. So if you imagine they're on stage and someone has an idea. Now, sometimes that idea can be seeded from the audience. Other times it just comes from one of the team members, one of the actor troupe come up with an idea. So they might come and say something like, someone stands up and says, "Honey, I'm home," as the start of this story. So then the other actors, the other performers will listen to that offer and they're going to think, okay, well, what can I do with that? Well, I could, so honey, I'm home, so I guess that person could be my husband or wife. They could be, I could be a murderer waiting behind the door before they come in. There's a whole bunch of ways. But what's important about this is that that idea is accepted. You don't change what that person has said. You don't adjust it. All you're doing is accepting that without judgment and adding to it. Yes, and. And you don't block. And what I mean by blocking is that it's very possible to completely change that story and to essentially block the progress. And what you end up with in that is not telling a narrative, but getting stuck, because every single person that gets involved essentially cancels off whatever the last person has said and continues the story in their own direction. And you never make any progress. You block the narrative. So what improv performers need to do is to pay attention to their performers, their fellow performers, listening really closely to what they are suggesting and what they have proposed, in order to make sure you create an environment that does not stymie creativity. And what I find and found really interesting about this mindset is we as engineers and people that work collaboratively, most people in this room, I imagine at least once a week will find yourselves in a room with your colleagues solving a problem, be that a technical problem or a non-technical problem. It's not an uncommon thing. So what would an attitude like that do to change the dynamic of those meetings, those conversations, where no one is shooting down people? The most common one here is people say, "Oh, well, that's all very well. It's all very well," they say. "But, you know, we've got some very junior people on the team. I mean, and those people, they have opinions. Opinions. And quite frankly, you know, they're just wrong all the time. And who the hell do they think they are, raising their voices in the first place with their junior opinions? We just don't have time for that. I want to build my complex event-driven architecture, and some guy just said, maybe we could just build a little REST service. Well, I don't want to do that because I want it to be big and complex, like my brain." And the problem is what you actually find, and a really interesting thing by a friend of mine called Woody Zuhl, who, if you know mob programming, you've heard that term, that he started that. And one of the things he's had is obviously when you're mobbing, you have a group of people working around one problem. And you frequently have situations where, you know, engineers, we disagree occasionally. And occasionally two engineers think that two separate ideas might be the right thing to do. So how do you resolve those conflicts in a safe yes-and way? Well, experimentation. You just do it. And in fact, interestingly, if one of those people is significantly more junior than the other, you know which experiment is most likely to be cheapest and quickest to prove or disprove? The junior's idea. The most junior person in the room, if you test their idea first, you are most likely to get to a resolution quicker because it's more likely to be simpler. And at the very least, even if it's not the right idea, not the perfect direction, you can disprove it very quickly, but you can do that respectfully. So, we're going to do some exercises. So, first one we're going to do is an exercise called human mirror. What I'd like you to do is to stand up. This is going to be exciting. I've never had quite such a dynamic, kind of height going on in the room. So there's a potential for, I don't know, like people falling over and legs breaking, health and safety things. I hope you all signed a waiver when you came in. No one's had too much beer, right? So what I'd like you to do is find a partner. So find someone nearby. If there is unfortunately an odd number of people in this room, then one of you will have to come up here and be my partner. So what I'd like to do is to stand opposite one another like this, okay? You're going to stare deeply into one another's eyes, and I would like you to smile, because smiling is great. You don't need to touch each other necessarily. I mean, that's up to you. You find that staring into each other's eyes can be deep and emotional. Are you the odd person? It's not you, it's mathematics. It's okay. If you could come out here for me, because it's useful having one person odd. The odd number, in fact, you're my favorite person because you're here. So what I'd like you to do is you're going to stand opposite one another like so. So if you can raise your hands, we're going to mirror one another. It's the word mirror. Yeah, exactly. You've already got it. And you're going to start to move, but you're going to maintain eye contact. And the aim is that you're not really going to know who's controlling and who's not. You're just going to reflect. So you try and do it. Keep going. I can see you're not doing it. I know I've got good peripheral vision. So you try and do it. It's easier when you do it slower. It's kind of creepy, actually. Ooh. Ooh. All right, I don't know if my wrist can actually twist all the way around that way. They might snap. Okay. Oh, all right, we're going very low. I don't know. I think I might need to go back up again. Okay. Thank you very much. Like, you totally weren't doing it up there. You know, you were really. Yeah. I trust you. So, there's a few nice things. That's actually just a warm-up exercise. So it's something I actually do. I use it a lot as a warm-up exercise for retrospective workshops and other workshops I'm doing. There's some really nice science that happens in this particular exercise, which is that when you stare at each other, there was a study done, I can't remember exactly, I think it was 1999 or 2000, by a guy called Professor Aaron. It was coined, 4 minutes of eye contact will make you fall in love. So you'll be thankful to know, if the person that you were with wasn't your long life partner, that you didn't do it for quite 4 minutes, so you're okay. I mean, it is quicker for some people, so you might find. But there's another thing that happens there a lot, is that you do immediately smile. I actually told you to smile, but people just immediately smile when you're in that situation. Smiling is actually a defense mechanism. So what happens is there's an unfortunate trait of mammals. Mammals are really good. We have a habit, unfortunately, thankfully not humans so much anymore, of consuming our young. Okay, it becomes awkward. It's kind of, if people have got hamsters or mice and things like that, it's quite common, surprisingly. Kind of parental snacking. What they found was in primates is that it's significantly less likely in primates, and one of the theories behind that is actually the evolution of smiling. So smiling is one of the very first things. I'm a parent. I imagine there's 1 or 2 parents in the room, and there's that time when, oh no, it didn't crack. It's okay. It's okay. There's a moment when your child is in its somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks, and it smiles for the first time. It's actually normally accompanied by wind passing or something equivalent, but some sort of smile comes out. And really what you just need to remember is that it may well be thinking that it loves you. I'm sure it does. But it's also thinking, shit, don't eat me, okay? So we're going to do another exercise. We're now going to tell a story, and this is where we get a bit more involved. So this story is going to be told by you, and you're going to start by one of a lovely volunteer is going to come up and start the story off with a single sentence, so a little sentence. Once upon a time, it was a dark and stormy night, etc. And they're going to stand here and say that sentence. Then we're going to get another volunteer who is going to come over here. And they're going to tell us how this story ends. I once did this in Nashville, of all places, and the beginning of the story was there was a speaker, and that day I was wearing red trousers, giving a talk. The last person came up and told me how the story ended, and he said, and he got dragged out by an angry mob and beaten to death. The talk was about safety, I pointed out to them. So let's avoid those topics. So what I'd like is a volunteer to come on. What's actually going to happen is once we have two people, if you imagine, we're going to know how the story begins and how it ends. We won't know how we got there. We're then going to have other volunteers that come up, and each person injects a little bit of extra story to try and connect those two dots together. So I'm going to grab that. I think this is on, isn't it? Hello. Oh, look at that. That's good. So, can we have a volunteer? This is the most terrifying bit for me. I want to point out, this may well be the last time I do this session. I've done it a lot in the last few years. So it might be the first time it fails if no one comes up to start our story off. So does anyone have an idea for a story? Go ahead, come down. So if you can take the catch box and stand here and just say the beginning of your story. Yeah.
Good evening. What sense does it make when everybody's today going on the Autobahn to Netherlands?
Everyone's going on the Autobahn to the Netherlands today, are they? Wow.
That's the beginning of the story.
Got everyone. Goodness me. That's a lot of people. So, how is this going to end? I mean, most things that start on the Autobahn end in a pile-up, in my experience, or very nearby. So how's this story going to end? Can I have another volunteer, please? Go ahead, come straight up. So if in fact you can read say your line again. Wait a sec. It's all right. So you're going to say your line again, and when you've said your line, chuck it down to the person at the end, and they're going to say their line, and we'll see where we're up to with our story. So that'll help remind you how you're going to finish the story. So go for it.
What sense does it make when everybody today is going on the Autobahn to the Netherlands?
And love it.
Due to climate change, the next generation does not need to go to Holland anymore because the sea has come right straight to the right to Düsseldorf.
Oh, I came from Amsterdam today. It was a beautiful city today.
Oh, yeah. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I know. They've got dikes. The Dutch know what to do with water. All right, so how are we going to get from, to be honest, I think it's kind of obvious. I think it's what we're doing right now. We'll see. How are we going to get from everyone on the Autobahn going to the Netherlands to climate change destroying all of the Netherlands? How are we going to get to that? Any ideas? Any injection of thing? We need to fill in this space here with willing volunteers to try and tell our story. Any ideas? Must be one. There must be some inspiration somewhere. Pardon? To be honest, I think we almost have a story. Really, technically, if you've followed the climate news, the fact that there's nothing in here right now is kind of ironic. It's like everyone used the Autobahn, everyone did nothing, Holland was underwater. But I'm making a political statement, so... So any ideas? No? Really? We could technically have a two-person story. We'll see. You have an idea.
I have ideas, yeah, of course.
You have ideas. So what I think you should do is someone should come up and you should whisper the idea to them. Or you could tell all of the story. Just want to walk down?
I just can give one hint.
Oh, go on, a hint.
So,
go.
In the US, there are guys who are trying to manipulate their diesel engines so that a lot of dust is coming out. So they are trying to pollute more.
Wow.
So what you can do, we have a lot of diesel engines in Germany, so we can do the same. And the advantage on the highway to Holland is when you do this, there is a lot of fogging behind of you. So you're creating traffic jamming behind of you, which may cause that in front of you it's getting more free.
Really, the Americans are amazing, aren't they?
Another hint.
Do we have an idea? Is anyone else going to come? Oh, here we go. Congratulations. We might have a three-act story. Thank you. So yeah, say your line and then we'll repeat everything else and work out where we are.
Okay, unfortunately, the way to Holland is really long, so we just wanted to do something against it. And as we are all driving SUVs, we just took the example of the US guys and just tried to manipulate our diesel engines, as we are all driving diesels, to get some more water to Holland.
Let's reread the line. I think we might have a story. Go for it.
Yes, another hint might be skip the diesel. Shift to autogas. That's it.
So, shall we reread the whole story? Is that okay? Yeah, I know. You're going to have to say it again. Everyone has to remember what they said. Yeah, completely. Let's see where we're up to with our narrative.
So let us know why everybody in Germany is going today on the Autobahn to the Netherlands.
Oh, wait. This person in the middle. Oh, you've lost your hat, but it's okay.
Yeah, but as the motorway to Holland is really, really long, and we don't like it, we just try to contribute a bit to the climate change to use all of our SUVs and manipulate them as the US guys do them to get some more pollution.
So that the next generation, instead of going to Holland to the beach to surf, can surf here in Düsseldorf, not only on the Unterbacher See, but directly on the sea with waves and everything.
Problem solved. You know what? I'm not going to flog this horse any further. I think we have a story. Thank you very much. Cheers. So, interesting exercise. First question. Did we tell a good story? We can be honest. There was a yes there. I'll take that. I'll take the yes. I normally try to map these stories somewhere on a scale of, like 1 part kind of axed first season Netflix series to, I don't know, Game of Thrones or a Hollywood blockbuster at the other end. I'll let you individually meditate upon where our narrative falls there. And anyone that wants to meet me afterwards to form a writer's room and pitch to Netflix for our new climate change drama, we'll see what happens. So, was the activity an engaging activity? Either if you're viewing it or if you're there. Was it engaging? Was it interesting? What's interesting about this activity, do you think? You might have just hated it. What I tend to find is that the most interesting thing is actually, the first thing is our need for stories. We hate closed loops, okay? So what happens is, if people have used the internet, what you might find is that you see a headline like, check out these 10 celebrities from the 90s. You will not believe how ugly they are now. Number 8 is horrific. Now, what you will think, as most people will think in this room, will think, I have absolutely no interest in how ugly people are in the 90s, or how ugly these celebrities are. But oh my God, I need to see number 8. I really have to see number 8. And what you do is you click and you click and you click and you click and you get all the way through and you've seen some advertising and you gradually feel more and more disgusted with yourself. Number 8 really wasn't that horrific. You didn't really recognize any of the other celebrities. Then you take a shower and you feel very, mildly refreshed. And maybe after a few weeks, you feel good about yourself again and willing to speak to an audience. What's interesting about this exercise is that it's actually safe to contribute ideas. And what I mean by that is it's safe for anyone to stand up and say whatever the hell they want. We're going to work with what we get when people are up here. And we're going to do our best to try and tell some sort of a narrative of what people are suggesting. The other thing is you have autonomy, as was demonstrated this evening, that you can contribute or not if you don't want to. It's up to you. They're not going to be pressured into coming up. We're going to try and encourage you. And also, it's safe to fail. Actually, what happens is people can come up and they can say what they need to, and either they're going to say their story, and either it's going to work or it's not, but as a group, you will try to make that work into a narrative. And also, as a group, what's interesting about this exercise is that, yeah, it's a storytelling exercise, but interestingly, it's not actually about telling a story. It's about learning about listening to one another and learning about how to collaborate. So, what did I find out about safety? One of the things I like to do is I like to write my own definitions for things. So if you imagine, if you spent a long time researching a topic, you've got all of these views, all of this data, all this information, what I like to do is to sit down and just meditate on that really and think, well, what is my definition of this? How can I distill all of that information into something that I think is my definition? And this is my definition of safety. You're safe when you can speak your truth, raise your concerns, and give and receive constructive feedback without the fear of humiliation, rejection, or punishment. This bit, for me, is the single most important part of that. It came from a lady called Esther Darby when I was interviewing her. And what that speaks to is authenticity. And what that means is not that you can say whatever the hell you want in that setting. In fact, it's very metaphorical in that sense. It's actually more that can you arrive with your team, with you and your organization, as you, and just be you, the same you that you are when you get home and when you're in the office, with all the same shit that you have going on in your lives, because as human beings, we all do. And just be there, as you. That doesn't even mean you need to say anything as you. It just means you can be there and know that you will be supported and not judged for being you. And that speaks to many other aspects. That speaks to diversity and inclusion, empathy. And that's why that is, to me, one of the most important aspects of psychological safety. So Google's Project Aristotle, as we mentioned at the beginning, they actually provides how they assess teams on those indicators, essentially like a little survey that you can do with your team. And maybe I'm just a little cynical. I'm a lot cynical. But I kind of imagine this world that will be not very far away from here, where a certified organizational safety consultant will turn up to your organization and walk around with a clipboard going, okay, yeah, so it's good. So round table, that's good. Oh, so in this meeting, are there any managers in this retrospective at the moment? No, okay, good. Okay, that's good. And, eye contact, I can see eye contact, okay, good. Okay, that's great. So you are an A+ certified psychological safety organization. There is a chart for your wall. Here is my invoice, most importantly. 14-day terms, please, and I will see you next year for your recertification. Just so you know, my fees are going up because, demand is very high for this psychological safety thing these days. Yeah, I'm quite cynical about that. My gut feeling is that certified organizational safety consultants will not help organizations become more safe. And there could well be one or two of them already, I would imagine. So what does actually help? Well, one of the interesting things that I found is that many teams that I work with are clearly demonstrating what I would call unsafe behavior. And what do I mean by that? Well, in an unsafe team, if you imagine that definition, being able to speak your truth, being able to raise concerns, being able to ask questions, well, or even being able to learn. What you tend to find is these teams, which are clearly unable to do all of those things, they're stood there in their stand-ups, in their meetings, with their arms crossed, kind of, oh gosh, But when you ask them, are you okay? And you talk to them about psychological safety, oh yeah, we're totally cool. We're absolutely fine. We're absolutely fine as long as I never have to make eye contact with any of my team or be in the same room as them for more than 10 seconds. It's absolutely fine. And what I found is that many teams literally are totally unaware of where they are at there. So what I've started, in fact, your last talk, I was interviewed with him the other day. Your last talk was a guy called Marcus Whitwer who came here, and he was talking about mindfulness. And what I use is a topic called paying attention. So what I mean by paying attention is really a subset of mindfulness. So this is you, and this first level is what I call becoming aware of experiential safety. So this is just you essentially connecting with that internal monologue. So you're in a meeting, you're in a situation, and you're thinking, well, can I say what I need to say? Did I say everything that I needed to say in that last meeting that I was in? Was there a reason why I didn't say the things I needed to say? what changed? Maybe I was able to say everything and then something changed. Oh, I wonder what that was. And that's really important, becoming mindful of those things. Then at the next level, you can expand that awareness out to everyone else in your team. And what that means is you're thinking, okay, well, I didn't feel safe in that particular moment. I didn't think that I said what I needed to say, and I'm not sure why I didn't say that yet. I wonder if Bob and Jenny didn't say what they needed to say, as well. Maybe they are also affected. And then you go out to what I call the organization. Get there. Or the environmental safety. And this breaks down into two areas. You have the organization. So this is everything outside of your direct team. And what I mean by that are going to be organizational policies that will affect the way that you interact with your peers and your colleagues, but not things that you necessarily have a direct influence over. Okay, so what do I mean by that? There can be policies like stack ranking. Stack ranking is a horrific practice that is done way more than it should be. A good example of it was a CTO that I heard of once that stuck up a poster in the staff cafeteria listing all of the engineers ranked by the number of defects they had contributed to the code base. It didn't help with psychological safety. The other aspect and the other bit that's outside on that is what I just call the person. Well, that's you. So what do I mean by that? Well, your psychological safety on any given day can be affected by any of those things. What's going on inside, what's going on outside you. Well, this stuff could be stuff that's happening within your organization. This stuff is stuff that's happening in your life. So, work-life balance, one of my least favorite topics. Why is it my least favorite topic? Because I would like you to raise your hand if you currently are in work. You don't have to if you feel uncomfortable about unemployment, but we're looking for a job. Are you currently working, or have you been in a work situation before in your life, either in school, in work? I'm guessing most of you, yes. Okay, leave your hand in the air, okay, if you are also alive while working. Okay, as in, do you have a pulse? Are you living? Are you conscious? Consciousness maybe is questionable for some jobs. What I find, you can put your hands down. No, it's fine. You don't need. What I find is that if you don't have this idea that somehow we can separate our personal and professional lives, that somehow if I am up all night with my child because he's sick, that I can be just as effective in the office because, well, obviously I'm a man, so I guess I can just compartmentalize my entire family, fit them in a small locker in the staff room, and get on with my day as if everything's okay. Well, that's bullshit, basically. It's absolute nonsense. Nobody is going to be unaffected by things in their lives. If you hire a human being to work for your organization, you get a human being, okay? They don't suddenly transform into a resource, okay, or an employee. They are still a human, and human beings come with all of the mess that human beings come with, and it's exactly the same as the mess in your life as a leader and their lives as employees. So all of those things can affect your level of psychological safety. So for me, paying attention is about noticing how you feel yourself, noticing the people around you, and approaching people in the organization with curiosity and not judgment. Because there's an interesting thing here, which is that a lot of the time we see negative behavior from people. Behavior where people are grumpy, people are not in a good mood, or whatever it might be. Most of the time, it's not about you, it's about them. There's a great line called, "You're not the star of your own movie." We're not all the stars of our own movie. In fact, there's one movie and all of us are supporting actors. And a lot of the time, people just have their own crap going on, and that's going to affect how they behave. It's a nice story from a company called Menlo Innovations just outside of Detroit. And in their company, they have this rule, which is that when someone is off in some way, someone's a bit grumpy, someone's a bit off, their behavior isn't good, for whatever reason, anything. It's not, do you have a problem, what's going on? The answer and how anyone in the organization will deal with it is they take them to the side and they say, "Are you okay?" Because the assumption is that person wants to be the best person they can be, which is true for most of us, and something is getting in the way of that. And maybe we can show curiosity and not judgment in those circumstances to see what we can do to help facilitate them being the best person they can be. So why do I really care about this? Nearly done. Why do we really care about this? Well, there was this study. So this is the Gallup poll. So people might be aware of Gallup. They look at engagement. They found that 2/3 of the, this is the US workforce, but this stat is basically slightly better by a couple of percentages in Europe, slightly worse in Asia by another couple of percentages, but this has been pretty much static internationally for the best part of the last 2 decades. 2/3 of the international workforce are disengaged with their work. And these people that are actively disengaged, remember the energy black holes? This is them. And they're actively disengaging the people that are engaged. You know what it feels like to work in the same room as some of those people, how much effort it takes when you're there and you can feel the energy being sapped out of you. That's what's happening. And then there's another study, funnily enough, around the same amount, that 2/3 of the US workforce say that work is a very or somewhat significant contributor to their effects of negative stress. And 1 in 2 of them lost patience with or shouted at their partner while stressed, or lost patience with or yelled at their kids. Just to put this into context, from the figures I got, this would be from 2018, early 2018, I think, that works out to about 50 million people in the US that fall into this category. So, what I was wondering was this relationship between stress and engagement. It seems that there seemed to be this parallel, and to me, there's a whole bunch of studies, when you look into the psychological studies on this, there's a whole bunch of studies that show that if I go into an organization and I say and measure the level of stress on a standard scale, and then on the other side measure how engaged the staff are on a standard scale, you will find, miraculously, that the staff are less engaged when they're really stressed. Okay, this is not that amazing, and it's pretty much standard and expected. I was interested in the reverse of that. Well, are they stressed? Are they not engaged because they're stressed? Or are they stressed because they're not engaged? And I found a thing called the Job Demands Resources model, which is some work done by Professor Demaruti around 2000. There's been a lot of studies done into this since that came out, this original theory. And what this shows is that actually engagement is a shield to negative stress. So what that means is that when you are engaged, imagine that time when you were in the office and you just lost track of time because you loved what you were doing. You just got lost in what you were doing. You don't think, oh God, I'm so stressed, or whatever. You don't even notice. Or the other side, you're stuck in the office because the manager needs to do some demo the next day and you really hate what you're doing and you know it's not going to work and it's 2 a.m. and it's kind of there. You are really stressed. So, engagement was demonstrated to form a shield to negative stress. So to finish, where's my closing slide? I've lost a slide. Anyway, I'll finish regardless of the weird missing slide. What I would like is to say that at the end of the day, safety is essential to the way that teams work. We now have multiple studies that demonstrate that organizations with high levels of safety, quite simply, are more effective. At the same time, safety is critical to your level of engagement. And with low engagement comes lower resilience to workplace stress. Workplace stress is described by the World Health Organization as the epidemic of the 21st century. And they estimate that stress at work costs the US economy some $300 billion a year. Well, it's not really about the money. That's nice, or rather horrible, but it's not about the money, because at the end of the day, what I care about, in fact, the stat that I care most about, is the 50 million American people and people outside of America that are shouting at their kids and losing connections with their loved ones as a result of stress at work. Because an abusive environment at work creates an abusive environment at home, because the work-life balance is nonsense. And if a shitty environment is at work, you have a crappy environment at home. And vice versa. Things affect one another because we cannot compartmentalize. So one of the things that, one of the people I interviewed was a chap who I can't remember. Hey, my mic's gone off. It's all right. Hello, can you still hear me? So one of the chaps, he basically just said, it's amazing the impact that psychological safety has. When you really look into it and you look into the research, you realize how profound this thing is. And really, being less abusive in the workplace, it really would change the world. So thank you very much. Don't know if there's... I'll take that off, since it was annoying me the whole way through. There we go. So, questions? I can throw this at you as well if you need a question.
The choice is yours. It's either me coming with the mic or him throwing it.
I'm not very good at throwing. Any ideas? I'm going to be around, so you're welcome to come and harass me afterwards.
I have a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Where do you get those pants from?
I dye them myself, actually. You knew this, yeah. I dye them myself because because they don't really make... In fact, I say that, but you didn't dye those yourself, and I think they look pretty good.
I bought them myself.
I could not find decent...
I sent you the link,
pants.
didn't I?
Yeah, but I'd already got them by then. I couldn't find decent pink pants in kind of a male cuts for some reason. So I just dyed them myself. Yeah.
I actually have a pretty regular question, actually.
Sure.
You've been talking about psychological safety all the way. Now, obviously, you've been in the business for quite some time yourself. So how do you actually cope with all the stress that you experience, particularly given that you're on the road quite a bit? You came here from Amsterdam the other day, and I assume you're heading back to Manchester tomorrow. So that obviously is a large amount of stress. So how do you personally deal with it?
Well, actually, I went from Gibraltar to Amsterdam, and I'm going to London tomorrow, and then I'm eventually going back to Manchester. So in the last couple of years, yoga and meditation are the two things that I do all the time. They have pretty much, it's great. Have a yoga mat, it fits in my bag, I can take it into any hotel room anywhere, and 20 minutes in the morning is enough to chill me out for the rest of the day. But yeah, I would recommend that. I mean, mindfulness, you learned a bit about mindfulness, those that were at last month's, is it last month or a few months ago?
I think it was in April.
April, there we
Marcus
go.
Wittwer.
Marcus's talk, mindfulness practice is kind of foundational to trying to stay sane, I think. So yeah, that's what I recommend.
Okay, great. Any further questions?
Ideas? Yeah.
Do you have any strategies for an introvert who's a member of a team that's dominated by mostly extroverts, and just getting a way for introverts to get their point and their points heard in team meetings?
I think it's always challenging. I think the difficulty with that is that what you really need in those circumstances where you have differing personalities in any group is good facilitation. And facilitation is lacking in many organizations and many teams. So I think the challenge is always going to be that. If you don't have a facilitator, then it's going to be challenging to essentially tell people to shut up when they need to. I don't know, it depends on the context that they're in or that you're in, is that things like talking sticks or equivalents and things like that can actually really help in teams just generally, because actually whether you're a team of introverts or extroverts, and I think that people tend to not be so binary on those things. I think most people can behave in an introverted way or an extroverted way in different contexts. I tend to find that most groups of adults and people that are interested and engaged are going to speak over each other and that kind of thing a lot anyway. So I use soft toys a lot. Get a squidgy soft toy. The funny thing I found is if you tell a team that you don't think they're communicating effectively or they're interrupting each other, essentially they're acting like kids and they can't do that. They get quite offended if you have something as literal as a talking stick. You know, they're like, we're not children, goodness me, you know. But you buy them a soft toy, an actual children's toy, and they don't get offended by that. They start to pet it in strange ways and care for it, and it becomes quite a loved member of the team. So yeah, I recommend soft toys are quite a good way of doing that. And you can actually bring them in. I've used them with teams in loads of different settings. We use them in stand-ups normally, you pass it round, but you can take them into retrospectives, you can take them into any meeting, and it just becomes a normal part. But that's the only thing I can recommend in that, without there being an external facilitator to help the flow of conversation be more effective. That's the only thing. Get a soft toy as an external facilitator. Cheers.
Right, anybody else?
Yes, I have a question. Thanks for your talk. I really enjoyed it. You have some...
There? Oh, hello. Sorry, I was like, so you see someone with a microphone up there, and I wasn't sure. I was like,
I can't see that. So my question is, do you have any tips of people trying to implement these tactics or ideas into organizations? Some books to read, some other tips for implementing and spreading these thoughts around.
Yeah. So the most obvious book is Teaming by Amy Edmondson, which is a great book on that whole topic. It's essentially the kind of pop psychology filtered down version of all of her research in that. I think that there's also, if you go to rework.google.com, that's all of the summary from Google's Project Aristotle. So there's a whole bunch of resources there. And they've done other studies in other areas, looking at leadership, looking at a whole bunch of other things, and they publish everything there. So that's quite a good resource as far as just links. Now, as far as exercises, the most important thing that I have seen with any of the teams that I've worked with where we focused on this has been essentially the mindfulness exercises that I call paying attention here. And that's literally just having a conversation with them. A lot of the time, I've done it before, I will essentially do this or a version of this talk for a team that I'm working with. We will then have a break and come back and have an open conversation with the group on what that means, what the context is. And just by raising the awareness of psychological safety, you begin that personal awareness, the individual awareness that they each have about how safe they are, makes it far more likely that they then have, a conversation around the water cooler about that meeting they had with somebody else, and it just begins to filter through. And it's that awareness which is the single most important thing, because actually you can do all of these things, you can talk about what an unsafe team looks like, but at the end of the day, what I found is that many of the teams go, yeah, but that's fine, but that's not our team, we're fine, but they're often not, and that's the reality. I also have so I love posters, so sticking posters up, I know it sounds really basic, like wonderfully basic, but if you go through and put a poster about paying attention or a poster about, how safe do you feel in this meeting, these kinds of things, put them everywhere and you begin to, again, bring it to the top of people's minds, which is what you want, is you want people to be thinking about it. So,
sorry, this is for addressing the team, but what's with the top management or other teams? How to influence?
It's exactly the same thing. Top management need to be aware of those issues. I'm often hired by top management in organizations, so it's easy for me to engage with them because, I'm paid to do so. If you are an individual on a team in an organization that clearly has challenges, you're going to have challenges, and that's just a reality. In an inherently unsafe organization, it's probably unlikely that you will be able to have a safe conversation with the CEO about your safety concerns, and that's just the reality. And I get asked this every single time I do this talk, unsurprisingly. I have a slightly sad answer to this, which is that it may well be that you do have more influence, okay, than you realize in your organization. So try and connect with those people, try and have those conversations and see what happens. If you then discover that you in fact don't have as much influence as you would like to have, I think it was Mary Poppendike, but then this is not just her thing, but she said this, change your organization or change your organization, basically, because unsafe organizations are not nice places to be, and it's better to be out of them, quite frankly. You know, don't kill yourself trying to transform an organization that you're going to struggle with changing. It's better to be somewhere else, because there are safe organizations, like here. You know, this place is pretty good on that front, and that's a good thing to you know, to consider. So,
Thanks.
thank you. Go ahead. Oh no, you got it. Go ahead.
Thank you for your talk. If you did find a person that is sort of increasing the psychological danger, I guess that would be the opposite word, or decreasing the psychological safety at the workplace, are there some tips on how to communicate to them, or like how to help them be aware without sounding like you're criticizing them?
So ask them if they're okay to begin with, because there's a pretty good chance that they're not, because they're acting in an unsafe way for other people, but they're often acting out from a position of fear or a position of struggle for whatever reason. That's your first step, is actually trying to recognize what's going on for them. Empathize, you know. They could be total assholes, but most of the time, most of us in fact can be total assholes at different times, and it's actually, we have our reasons for being like that. We have our reasons why we have been like that day. It could be anything from, you know, having a massive loss in the family, or a tragedy, or, you know, or just having a bit of a hangover, you know, but it's probably something external, and you can probably begin to connect with that. Wary of the time, but there's a brief story that I'll tell in relation to that. I was co-coaching with another colleague a few years ago, and I left. I was kind of like the temporary coach, and I hired him as a full-time coach to work in the organization, and then I buggered off once we'd handed over. And about 6 months after I left, I get a call from him, and he just says, oh, while you were there, did you by any chance work with the such and such team? I can't remember the name of it. And I said, no, I never worked with that team. He says, oh, well, I've just been moved over to this team, and there's this guy on the team. And he kind of paused, and you could tell he pretty much hadn't actually been able to vent to anyone other than me. And I hadn't spoken to him for months. I didn't know him that well. And he went on to explain how this chap was an engineer on this new team, and literally any suggestion that he made to help them change behaviors. So he had suggested, it'd be nice if we could experiment with pairing, maybe. So he had said, what I'd like you to do is to pair for just 2 hours with anyone on the team at some point in the next 2 weeks, okay? And he suggested that, and this guy was just like, what? I don't have time for that. I mean, I don't know about those guys, if they apparently have time for that, but I mean, frankly, I'm doing the real work here. Like, would literally be shouting and inherently unsafe behavior. And he just was completely at a loss. He didn't know what to do. I just said, well, firstly, have you had a one-to-one with him? And he kind of went silent and was like, I'm terrified enough of him in a public setting, let alone having a one-to-one. And I was like, well, just take me through why you don't want to have a one-to-one. What's going to happen? Just imagine that setting. You're in a room with him. What are you saying to him? And he said, well, I just kind of want to say, you've got a shitty attitude, fix yourself, basically. And I said, you don't want to say that. And he said, well, I know I don't want to say that, but what the hell else is there to say? I don't even know how to begin. I said, look, just try this. So what he did was he invited him into a meeting. The guy complained apparently for ages before eventually allowing himself, admitting he had 5 minutes free at the end of Friday, you know. And he went in, and all Andrew, the coach, said to him, he thanked him for coming and said, I really appreciate you're really busy. Thank you so much. And he just said, look, I can see that you've really been struggling over the last month. I've been working with the team with some of the changes that me and the team have been bringing in. Is there anything I can do to help? And the guy said nothing. He basically just, if you imagine a 45-year-old teenager, which isn't actually that hard to imagine in reality, is he just kind of went, oh, you know, all right, whatever, and then kind of shrugged off and went out. The following Monday afternoon, Andrew gets in late, and he walks in through the door, and I think the guy's name was Mike, he said. Mike is sat there, like if you imagine the door's kind of open and there's a big group of tables like in the middle. And Mike is sat there pairing with one of the engineers on the team, like literally in front of him. And he kind of opens the door and he's like, woo! Okay, and kind of tiptoes around and goes down to the other engineer and was just like, what the hell is going on over there? And they were like, we have no idea. We have to stand up. And Jenny said that she was struggling with the microservices architecture. And Mike just went, oh, I was working on that last week. Can I, you know, maybe I can help you with something. And he said, they've been sat there all afternoon, all morning. And then I was like, and he was just like, we have no idea. Jenny was terrified, you know, like, and the interesting thing is that this guy didn't like transform overnight. I mean, it sounds a bit like that. Yeah, he went and actually agreed to pair for the first time. He still thought most of this agile stuff was just bullshit. He didn't really want to do it. He was kind of cantankerous and a bit difficult, but he began to collaborate. He began to connect. And interestingly, he never ever asked for help, okay? The difference is that what happened in that conversation is that you have two options in those circumstances. You can say, I see you need help, or you can say, I see you are an asshole. And you can guess which one of those two options actually allow you to connect to that person as a human being and allow them to feel that they've been seen. And that's not the only story that I have of it, an example of that kind of thing, where you're basically just allowing that person kind of to play against type. You expect them to be cantankerous and grumpy and difficult, and they often are, and giving them an opportunity to not do that, and then suddenly they might surprise you. So that's the only thing I can say. I can't guarantee that that will work. To be honest, I was as surprised when I met up with Andrew shortly after we had that phone call and he told me what happened as much surprised as he was. But I think there's a starting point there, and I think that sometimes, quite frankly, there are people that probably are better suited not in the organization anymore. That's just a reality. That's not because they have failed. I actually think it's because they've been failed by the organization over time. But short of that, there is always things that you can try, and you start by seeing them as human beings, and you might be able to get that. I think you have to see those people as victims as much as anything else. So I hope that answers that, kind of.
It did. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more?
Anybody else? Anybody curious?
Yeah, me.
Oh, hello.
Sorry. Yeah, I have a question. Well, actually, you answered a couple of my questions already, but I have another one. It's a little bit off topic. So what do you think makes a good leader, also in the context of mitigating stress and helping their teams to be more engaged?
So I don't think it's completely off topic. I think that for me, I talk about a thing called facilitative leadership. And what I mean by that, and I actually mentioned it briefly at the beginning when I was talking about the progress principle, is that as a leader, your goal should be to facilitate your team in getting their work done. And what I mean by that, and that seems kind of obvious because most leaders would probably say that in some way or another they are doing that. It has to start from a foundational belief that the team of people that are doing the work actually want to do the work, okay? And that they are able to do the work and that they have the skills to do the work. And that as a leader, you're saying, I have a bunch of experienced, skilled, good people that desire to do a good job on this task, and they've said they need some help from me in whatever it might be, either the right equipment, or it might be the right space, or a change of desks and those kind of practical things, or it could be they need to better understand the goals, better understand the vision, better understand what they need to do. All of those things are the things that that leader can do to facilitate progress. When leaders get stuck on trying to manage, trying to control, that tends to be stemmed in a belief that the individuals on the team literally don't care and don't want to be there. And if that's your starting belief, if your inherent belief is essentially that, you know, your worker bees wouldn't be there if you weren't paying them, and they probably wouldn't be, and that's probably a good idea. But at the end of the day, it's more about, is that the only reason they're there? Or are they there because they actually care about what they're doing? And most people definitely want both. And I think that, yeah, that's the main thing. Is a good leader is someone that starts from a foundational belief in frankly, the inherent goodness of the people that are working for them and the fact that they want to be there. I occasionally have discussions with leaders who will say things like, you know, I mean, yeah, the team's pretty good, but there's this guy, you know, I mean, you know what Andy's like, for example, you know what such and such person is like. And I remember just saying to him, so do you really believe that that person isn't acting in the best interests of the team or the organization? And they go, well, I mean, you know what he can be like. And I go, so why is he still here? Why is that person here if you genuinely believe that they're not acting in the best interest? And most people get stuck on that. They're like, well, because why on earth would you want anyone there? If you actually thought that you had a saboteur on your team whose only goal was to fuck up your project, why on earth are they still there? You know, just ask them to leave. Say, if we're not aligned. But in reality, most people struggle with that, to accept that. Because in reality, most of us accept that probably, just like them, they want to do a good job, like most of us actually want to do. And it's far harder to, it's difficult to accept that. But I think that, to me, the leaders I know that inherently accept that their people want to do a good job and are trying to help them do that, as opposed to help them do that, they need to control them and manipulate them into doing a good job. The former tends to be more effective.
Thinking about leaders as facilitators, especially in this kind of agile environment, that gets me thinking that especially leaders are in the position to somehow make sure that the team is feeling psychologically safe. What are your thoughts on this?
I don't think that as a leader you can make a team feel psychologically safe in the same way that I don't think that as an individual I can't make anyone feel anything, in a way. I think that leaders need to recognize the inherent environment that they create. So they will create an environment with everything they do in a space within the organization, by setting examples, by modeling behaviors, and they need to recognize the effect that that will have on that team and the way they behave. That team is going to create or not create safety, but not. I don't think the leader themselves will directly create or not create that. I mean, yeah, sure, if you're talking about a team lead on a team and they walk into a meeting room and shout at everyone, then yes, they're going to directly contradict that. But if we're talking about the CEO of an organization and the effect that they have over the wider organization, that's a different thing in that context.
That gets me to my last question. What would be the one thing that makes the biggest difference, in your opinion, that a leader or actually any other member on the team or the CEO or any other employee can do to kind of create an environment where others feel psychologically safe? You talked about, seeking face-to-face conversations and talking with each other. Is this the thing?
Yeah. So as a leader, you have a huge amount of influence. And the important thing to do is to model the behavior you want to see. If as a CEO, you are discussing things like how psychologically safe you feel, and you discuss those things openly. An interesting question actually came up to me I gave this just day before yesterday in Amsterdam. And one of the questions that came was, I've got we've got some junior engineers, and he said that they're perfectly talented and things, but sometimes they will be asking questions to like the engineering manager that are downright disrespectful, they said. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? They said, well, like the other day, one of their junior engineers, the engineering manager's in a meeting, and he came up with an idea, and the junior engineer said, that's a dumb idea. And what I pointed out to the chat was just remember that psychological safety, while a leader in any leadership position, any hierarchical position, is going to have more influence over the psychological safety of the of subordinates in that circumstance, That doesn't mean, because the CEO is also a human, or in this case the engineering manager, that their psychological safety can't be affected by people who are subordinate to them, potentially to a lesser degree, because everyone's human, and psychological safety is a human trait, not a hierarchical organizational trait in that sense. So as soon as you discuss that and allow the leaders to begin to start those conversations, you're onto a winner. And that's what we were discussing before, that if the C-suite aren't engaged in that journey, in that transition, you can be onto a massive loser, because they could be creating a hugely unsafe environment that, sure, you can create a bubble down here, but if the environment is essentially toxic, then at best you're good until your oxygen runs out, and then you're screwed.
Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Is that it? Oh.
Yeah, just that your answer just made me think. Do you think that in some teams maybe an overemphasis on safety can lead to an environment where people are, I don't know another word to say this, like fake niceness? And essentially the team comes to a place where they can't really be honest with each other. And
so, interesting. There's a difference between discomfort and safety. Okay, so if I have to give you direct feedback, so let's say we're in a retrospective, and we're having a conversation, and I say, Adrian, the other day when you were cracking a joke in the office and you made me feel really uncomfortable, I didn't like it, frankly, it actually hurt quite a bit. And I just can't handle you doing that all the time. Now, you know what? Giving that feedback, especially if that had happened, wouldn't feel comfortable for me, and it certainly wouldn't feel comfortable for Adrian. That's never going to change. But the fact there was psychological safety allowed me to give that feedback in the first place. So what psychological safety gives you is the ability to go into those uncomfortable, difficult conversations in a situation where it's safe to do so. It doesn't make them more comfortable. So in my opinion, and one of the interesting misnomers of a safe team is you assume that a safe team is a team where there seems to be no conflict, no one's arguing all the time, no one's fighting, no one's disagreeing. I knew a team who were very safe actually, but their chosen method, in fact the opposite probably of the circumstance you were describing with introverts and extroverts, they were all a bunch of loudmouths, 6 unbelievable loudmouths, and their chosen method for dealing with conflict was to go into a meeting room and shout at each other basically for 2 hours, and they would come out and have beers and they'd be fine. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen, but they were like brothers or something. They were like this mad family. But the thing is that actually what's a really interesting thing about safety is that a safe team, so you can have 5 safe teams that all are very different, but unsafe behavior tends to be quite similar, and it involves a lack of conflict, a lack of open discussion, lack of people disagreeing with one another, all of the things those things tend to be pretty consistent. But once you get safe, everyone's able to be themselves, so what you end up with is very unique ways of dealing with conflict, dealing with those things. But everyone's able to get into uncomfortable situations. I love, like giving direct feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you.